Well, hello, everybody. The Veterans Collective is honored to present to you today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So if you can just go to the next slide. It's fantastic to be able to present to you all of the progress that's gone on since the last meeting, the last VCOEB. There has been so much progress in respective areas, different areas that are absolutely of importance. As you heard, that includes things like considerations of what veterans would like to see in the community, a particular interest in safety and security, which I've outlined some of the measures that we've taken most recently here and engaged in with VA. It includes implementing the wider campus services and amenities. It includes the interface between the services building 300 and building 13 and other buildings that will house services that are what veterans over the years have told us that they want and need, and most recently in this survey iteration have outlined are important to especially those living on the campus. So digging into this slide, a safe and empowered community, lots of progress in the backbone community building. As you probably know, and we've talked about before, the backbone established and uses a collective impact model, and that includes establishing a common agenda with stakeholders. There are many different stakeholders across the campus and also community-wide, as we touched on earlier. We have worked to develop shared measurements and methods of looking at different challenges, developing platforms for continuous communication, establishing and implementing joint and aligned plans of actions, which are especially important around safety and security, and then engaging with funders and other resources in order to bring opportunities to the campus, like Road Good that you just heard about in the presentation, originally was a funder for US Vets and collective partner sites. So there's been a lot of common area safety and security planning detail that's gone on. Most recently with Building 300, you can see some of the illustrations show the different types of security that are considered for that particular building. I know there's been a lot of conversation about joint/shared spaces, community spaces, and how those will be managed. So you can see here a diagram of the different types of security measures, things like electric locks and card readers, and which way do doors lock? How do we ensure that resident spaces remain resident spaces and those public and community spaces are usable? How do we manage and maintain that? So these are all conversations that are occurring. You can see on the bottom right, there's a security office diagram. There's been a shared commitment to one provider among TVC, that's Elite Services. So we're working in conjunction with them. Building 300 in particular will involve having not only a stationary security guard, but also some roving. There will be those who work in the building trained in the different security measures, not unlike the other EOL housing buildings. There are a lot of security measures that are put in place. In fact, VA recently amassed a safety and security working group. There were 3 different working groups, and that went on from about July until September. And out of that came a list of recommendations that, of course, I'll defer to VA on to present, if requested, wider implications and ramifications. But it really was a deep dive into the different issues seen not only amongst residents but staff. Much like with the resident survey that we just discussed, Andrew Strain and I went out to the different buildings, talked directly to residents, got their feedback, and really tried to understand what was occurring in terms of their thoughts on safety and security, not only in the buildings, but among the community. So you'll see here the security hub that we're looking at that will monitor, have top-down cameras to all of the shared community spaces under the collective, the physical security, and of course that campus-wide security safety planning. So next slide, please. Continuing that, there was the launch of the inter-campus communication system. So we have done a soft launch on that. We are using a platform called Thrive, which has a platform area where residents and others are able to communicate with TVC, and especially with the opening of the services center, the temporary services center in place of Building 300 on the campus. If you haven't been out here, we're adjacent to Building 100, which is under construction, but you'll see a building, a structure that's gray and blue. And if you come into this center, there are things like resources and amenities. We have resource boards. We not only, under the collective, have raised a sharing library that is external. So there's about 16 different categories that anyone in the veterans community can access. But we've translated those into hard copies and lots of conversations about how information is shared on the campus of veterans. How do we get word out? How do we communicate with each of the different buildings? So these are really granular things, but I think really speak to some of the conversations that were had earlier this morning about getting out information. We've been working carefully with VA on vetting and engaging community partners. Things like the nutrition working group, which is one of the partner and provider alliance members, working in conjunction with the food bank that's going to go in Building 300. So how do we make these connections early? How do we make sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction? And how do we do it ensconced in VA departments with subject matter experts all around us and make these connections happen the way that they need to in order to serve veterans in the best ways possible. So there's a lot of systems thinking that goes into that. There are multiple different categories that are examined, not just those 16 different resource categories, but things like security, transportation, amenities, those wider discussions about the things that veterans would find valuable on the campus, nutrition, there's faith-based resources. There's just a plethora of different items for coordination, which of course the collective cannot do alone. And really relies on the partnership of VA and other community partners. So you'll see here a list of the different items that we're working on, including that very important point and piece that we talked about earlier today, the continuous feedback collection. That feedback collection has been ongoing since the collective was contracted to the VA. That includes both, initial surveys that were put together by the developer team, feedback from the Federal Register that's been submitted every time it's been opened, things like the joint work that we did, that survey information, lots of qualitative feedback over thousands of events over the past years since the collective came into existence. So all of those things really inform our work on the campus. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to talk about the services and amenities progress. At the root of the community, as Rob, you noted, and others, there is that therapeutic community approach. Residents have responded really, really well to that approach so far. There have been lots of questions about the number of type of security guards, for instance, that might be needed. The collectives model and US Vets as a lead service providers model that we use is called the therapeutic community. Within that, and working in conjunction with VASH teams, and the VASH protocols as they exist, we adopted the Housing Retention Action Plan. So it's a 4-step plan created by PATH initially that really has worked in some substantial ways to keep veterans in Building 207 as the first building, but we anticipate for further buildings to keep veterans healthy, happy, housed, and address issues when they come up immediately and account for that conversation between services and property management. So you can see here some of the dual roles between property management and case management. Those things are really important to take into account. So you can read that on your own, get more of an idea, but the interface and the HRAP also brings the voice of the veteran to the conversation. It's noticing that perhaps there's an issue. There's been reports from other veterans in the building, and property management and services are able to draw the veteran into that conversation and find out what's really going on with them, as opposed to, a punitive, non-preventive model of looking at issues and dealing with them retroactively. This is a preventive measure that we've put in place. It appears to be working. There have been, to this point, no evictions in Building 207, and it opened a year ago. Additionally, lots of joint work undertaken with VA and other developer services partners. So spreading that HRAP model across the different buildings and VASH partnerships. So sharing information really has been a big part of both the backbone under TVC and US Vets as the lead service provider. Finding the best ways to do things, incorporating new tools and actions that case managers and others on the ground can take. There's been the multi-year VASH RFP that's been awarded for the upcoming buildings. As you know, we'll hear more about. There are 2 that will be opening in January that we're very, very excited about. But lots of joint events, trainings, initiatives with VA and community partners. All those things are continuously being built. There have been all of these different wonderful initiatives that have gone on. Theater art starts in February. We're starting training for veterans who would like to be involved in training with the Shakespeare Center of Los Angeles. Literacy, workforce. There was just another veterans construction career fair held here. 15 veterans showed up who wanted to work on bringing this housing community to fruition. Next slide, please. And finally, the wider community, the macro community, if you will. There's been a slate of building and campus events that have been completed thus far. Lots of supportive efforts for the residents growing. And again, that includes creating those connections. How do we get information about what's going on in the Veterans Garden to veterans in the wider community? How do we, how are we responsive to hearing what veteran needs are and able to build programming? And one of those ways has really been direct interface. We did implement, along with community partners and the tremendous support of VA, the Bunker Social Peer Community Gathering, that incorporates not just resources, but also trained veteran peers, which is very important. Veteran peer work is a different model that is not specifically clinical, but opens up the door and has trained peers who know how to have those conversations if a veteran might be needing something. That group has grown from maybe 10 to 15 to 70 to 100 veterans coming out into what eventually allegedly will be the town center outside building 306 every Monday. So lots of conversations happen there, lots of feedback is collected. Actually, I think I pulled another number. So between April 2024 and November 1st, there have been 1,388 peers served at one event on that Monday at Bunker Social. So that includes veterans who are unsheltered, who are coming, they find resources there, are able to get housed through the transitional housing line, residents on the campus, veterans from the wider county. VPAN is a partner, DAV is a partner, American Legion is a partner, VA sections are partners, and it's a tremendous effort. So I'm very, very proud and excited to share that. There's also a veteran band you can see in the picture. And the flowers, there's a little farmer's market area. Those were donated to the veterans, and you can see our information table and listings of events, right? So getting these events and really great things going on in the community out to veterans. But there's a thorough research of organizational partners. Needless to say, there's been a lot of groups and individuals who have kind of just come out of the ether looking to serve veterans, some with ulterior motives. So it is very important to the collective to vet those partners very carefully, looking through their financials, for instance, making sure they're reputable and have the best interests of veterans at heart, but before they are incorporated into any kind of community exercise. So with that, I'll hand off the slides. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tess. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Brian DeAndre, Senior Vice President at Century. And we wanted to start with Tess today and share with you the amazing community that is emerging. And when we think back to our original selection under the RFP from that summer of 2018, we were tasked with and ultimately selected to create community. And you're going to hear a lot about the housing today. There's lots of pictures of progress that we're thrilled to share with you. But I think what excites us most is this emerging community that Tess just spoke about. It doesn't happen on its own. It takes manpower, it's women power, it takes partner agencies, it takes funding. A lot of this backbone work that Tess has just spoken to has been philanthropically funded. And I want to acknowledge Wells Fargo as one of the key sponsors of that effort. So hopefully you get a sense of all of the activity and opportunities for engagement for our residents, which is really important as we seek to promote recovery amongst our residential population. And so with that, I'll turn my attention to Building 404. This is Century's first project that we broke ground on in November of 2022. It sits right in front of Building 207. We are rumbling towards completion early next year. You can flip to the next slide, please. We have a couple progress photos. We're into finishes and the interiors. The building is coming out beautifully. It's a 3-story Type 5 building on a podium with some subsurface parking. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We've initiated the leasing process. We're in addition to the completing the finishes on the inside of the building, we are wrapping up the site work and landscaping on the outside of the building. You can see that exterior progress in this photo. Next slide. Several months back, we initiated the lease-up process and have been organizing weekly meetings with our partners at the VA and the Housing Authority. This slide is slightly outdated. It shows 54 active referrals. We actually have 8 applications that are approved as of earlier this week. So we're making good progress towards the 72 homes that we ultimately will fill in this building. Next slide, please. Our next set of buildings that are under construction are buildings 156 and 157. These are the old tuberculosis hospital buildings, beautiful assets that sit up on the North Campus, fronting the 205, 208, 209 quad. The first 2 of these buildings, 56, 57, represent 112 units. We are moving towards completion in the late spring next year, May of 2025. Of our 112 veteran homes, we have set aside 35 of those units specifically for veterans that present with a mental illness. The building will feature extensive case management, both through the VASH case management as well as several positions that will be funded by the building directly. Next slide, please. The building is a beautiful example of the Spanish Mission Revival architecture. You can see the cupola up on the roof, the south facade of building 157 in the lower right-hand corner. There are some just amazing spaces in this building, a ton of natural light. There will be beautifully landscaped courtyards in between these buildings. We're so excited to share this with you all in due time. Next slide, please. You see on the interior, we're into drywall and making good progress. Next slide, please. And one more. All right. The last project that Century has under construction is building 158. This is the sister project to 56, 57. It's on the eastern side of those 2 assets. It will contain 49 homes for veterans experiencing homelessness. We broke ground in November of last year, so we're just about a year in and expect to reach completion in the summertime of next year. Next slide, please. These buildings are a little bit behind 56 and 57, obviously. You can see the rough framing that's happening. Next slide, please. We actually had to add a new roof to building 158 to mirror the gabled roofs that are on 56 and 57. You can see our metal studs and some of the MEP work that's ongoing. Next slide, please. A lot of seismic retrofit work had to happen. You can see some of these light wells that have been created on one of the facades. Next slide, please. And the last thing I want to mention is that in connection with building 156-57, we have undertaken nearly $20 million worth of streetscape and pedestrian and active transportation infrastructure work throughout the North Campus that will connect all of these new buildings to each other and then down to the west side of the campus and where the big blue bus lines will be available to shuttle residents to various uses throughout the region. So this is work that is being funded through the State Department of Housing and Community Development. There is a component of IIG, which stands for Infill Infrastructure Grant Funding, as well as ASIC, which stands for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. And these programs are really oriented around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and promoting active transportation, pedestrian, bicycle, and also public transportation. So this has been a labor of love for our team. A lot of effort has gone into this. Coordination's been required, given all of the surrounding work that is happening on top of this work. Next slide, please. And here you can see just some of the street widening work, new curbs, things of this nature, new sidewalks, etc. Next slide, please. This is the repaving of MacArthur. And next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to our friends over at TSA.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Brian. It is great to see so many familiar faces here today. Thank you again for the opportunity to brief. I'll give you guys a quick update today on Building 402, which we're now calling by its permanent name, which is 701 MacArthur. As you all have seen on prior briefings, it's a modular new construction project. We have 118 new homes for formerly homeless veterans, and we have 2 units set aside for staff. So we will always have 2 members of our team on site at this property. Next slide, please. As you can see, we are nearing construction completion. We're on track for early 2025, hopefully by the end of January. As you can see, it is a garden style building. So there's a lot of outdoor space. It's on 3 acres, ample landscaping, walkways, and open areas for veterans to gather on this parcel. The top left is the primary entrance, which again, there's still some work left to be done, but we're looking forward to finishing up the landscaping and all the site work and being complete sometime in January. Next slide, please. That's just another angle from MacArthur. That is our future community room. I also want to mention that we are happy to have completed the phase 1 infrastructure work that was all along MacArthur earlier this year, which gave way for the Century team to step in with their really important ASIC work that will benefit all projects around this area. So we're glad to be working in partnership with them on all of the MacArthur work. Next slide, please. So this slide, like Brian's slide, is a little out of date at this point. We're really pleased with the progress that's been made. We have 187 referrals at this point. Our team has been doing interviews and processing applications on site at the DOM, at CTRS. I know the GLA and OEM teams have done so much to help drive referrals to this project. So we have more than 1-to-1 ratio at this point, and we look forward to getting as many veterans approved and into their homes as quickly as possible. That's it for me. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon. This is Steve Peck, CEO of US Vets. This is US Vets' first building as a developer. As has been mentioned, we're doing a lot of the case management for the various buildings, but we are also developing this building. It is 38 units with 1 manager unit. It is female veteran priority. We know that there are women out there, particularly women with children, who have very few resources available to them. So we want to make sure that they have a priority place on campus. You're looking at the rendering there is the top 2 stories. There's a 3rd story that is below that faces only to the east. And there's a secure entrance on the south side of the building. So it will provide real security for women. There's a garden behind the building, which overlooks the vet garden that was talked about earlier. And we think it's a really excellent spot so that women will feel secure there on the edge of campus. The abatement and demolition are complete, and we anticipate the certificate of occupancy in April of 26. We're bringing female veterans services to this building. We've had a program for 8 or 9 years called Women Vets on Point, which provides counseling and services for women veterans. They are already visiting campus, so that will be providing additional services aside from the VASH case management to the women in that building. Next. This is some of the progress that is being made. As you can see, we've gutted the building. In that upper right, you see the 3rd floor on the ground level there. Next. Building 300, we have just been, I'm happy to say, awarded low-income housing tax credits. That just happened 2 days ago. So we anticipate close of financing and start of construction by June of 2025 with about a 20-month construction schedule. We also, this is the support service building on the North Campus. We've talked about 2 hubs on campus. One, the support service building, which is this building 300, and 2, the town hall building in the town square, which will be the social hub. And we've already talked about having dining facilities there, having a store there. This really is a food desert on the North Campus, and a whole variety of service of social services for veterans and a real gathering place for veterans on and off campus. Building 300 will has 15,000 square feet of support service space. So all of our community partners will have space in there. There will be a food bank. Westside Food Bank is going to have a food bank specific to veterans there. Peers will be there. A barber shop, U.S. Vet staff, and homeless prevention. We want this building to serve veterans on and off campus as we drive down the homeless population, as we have done in many communities across the country. We want to be able to provide those homeless prevention services, mental health and employment services that will prevent veterans from becoming homeless in the first place. So we're very excited to get this up and running. And at the moment, Tess is running our service center. We have a double-wide trailer next to Building 210 that is currently providing all those services that Tess has talked about. This will be the permanent home to all of those services, and the backbone will be headquartered here, so we'll be able to coordinate those services across campus. Next. This goes over to TSA.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
A little louder if you can.
Yes, okay, great. Yeah, that's why I dialed in from my phone. I apologize. I will speak as loudly as I can. Yes, we're so happy that Building 300 did receive that tax credit allocation so they can kickstart the hub for the North Campus. We, on the other hand, are pushing full steam ahead with the town center projects, 408 being the first one. We will be applying for tax credits in January. We look forward to starting construction late in 2025. As you can see, that's our most recent rendering on the bottom. We're building 100 new units for formerly homeless veterans, and we're really looking forward to taking us into the next phase of this project at West LABA. So thank you, and next slide.
Thank you, Parisa. And like Parisa said, Building 409 is the second development in this same area. This is the phase 2 area of the campus in and around what is currently known as the town center. This project contemplates 117 units. We anticipate starting construction in November of next year. Following an award of tax credits, we'll be applying like TSA in January of this coming year. We anticipate that this project will have a wonderful arts and entertainment milieu that will support healing and recovery for our residents. So we're very excited about that. Next slide, please. Broadly speaking, this picture paints the picture of where we are in terms of the minimum 1,200 homes that were promised as part of the original settlement agreement from back in 2016. So with all of the projects that we've just spoken to that are in pre-development, Buildings 300, 408, 409, 13, and 256, which weren't discussed today, but we will be just under 100 homes short of that minimum target of 1,200 units. And so it is quite remarkable that we have gotten to this place within essentially 6 years of our selection, right? We were selected in November of 2018 and have come a very, very long way. I love the fact that we opened today's presentation with you on the community, because you can see now these homes being delivered, residents moving in, and this community really blooming. Next slide, please.
Brian, just quickly before you go on, let me ask a question. What's the date by which you project you'll get to 1,200 units?
Could we go back one slide, please? Rob, is the question, what is the date by which we expect those 1,200 units will be delivered or
Yeah,
started?
fair enough. I'm just saying, with this pipeline right here, what's the approximate date for that 1,100 units, I guess, that you have forecasted?
You know, I would want to take a look at the placemat and get you a good number. I don't want to promise a date. I just would want to look at that. It's within reach, I'll say that, and then we can follow up with you with a specific target that we're working towards.
What about the category under construction, phase 1? Do we know when you're going to get to it looks like 780 units?
Yeah, so 401B, that's the, I don't know if core companies reported out to you, but that's our second phase that is going to be delivered soon with buildings 402, 404. Right, so those are all, within the foreseeable future. 56, 57, 58, all will be delivered next year and begin getting leased up. And then 210, Steve just reported on, which I think was an April 2026 delivery. So within about a year and a half, all of those homes under construction will have been delivered.
Great. Okay, so within a year and a half, we'll see almost 800 units.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you got it. All right, next slide, please. So, what has enabled all of that progress are the incredible financing commitments that we've received from the private sector, from the public sector, from the VA itself. This slide shares with you where all of those commitments have come from, organized by project status. So completed projects under construction, projects that are closing, and projects in pre-development. In total, we estimate close to $900 million of financing commitments have been leveraged, and that number will surely go up as buildings 408, 409, 256 move forward in the year ahead with their financing applications and anticipated awards. So, we will, when all is said and done, be well north of $1 billion in financing commitments that will have enabled this transformation. Next slide, please.
If I can add to that, we just received a $10 million philanthropic donation for the Wellbeing Center in Building 300. So, and have a number of meetings with people with real money, billionaires with a B. Hopefully, we'll be bringing more of that in.
Thank you, Steve. And that's a great segue to the next slide, which is the Veteran Promise campaign, which I think you're best equipped to speak to.
Indeed. I preempted myself. So we're continuing to have meetings with the foundations. This latest $10 million donation came from the Schmidt Family Foundation. We've been talking to them for many years. Rick Caruso is going to be visiting campus. A number other significant family foundations will be visiting us. So at this point, our Veteran Promise campaign has raised about $100 million. Our goal is $188 million, and that will include an endowment that will continue to provide funding for the support services on campus. So we're making good progress, but we've got a ways to go.
Thank you, Steve.
Next slide.
Steve, would you like to bring it home?
Sure. So we talked about we're well underway with the construction at this point, and 700 units, well, closer to 800 will be done by 2026. We're making the connectivity improvements. As you know, that the streets and sidewalks on that North Campus need a lot of work. We constantly see veterans in wheelchairs rolling down the middle of the street. So these infrastructure improvements are really going to make it safer and easier for veterans to get down, for instance, to the metro, which will be completed, I think, in 2028. We're continuing to design and raise funds for the Veterans Plaza area. We'll have a couple of 2 or 3 projects, groundbreakings pretty quick. And I've already talked about the Veteran Promise campaign, and we still have some legislation that we need in order to provide the ongoing amenities that we all envision on campus. So we're working with our lobbyist in DC on that. Hopefully we can get that done over this next year. And I think all in all, together, we've made remarkable progress. I'm not sure anyone anticipated we'd get this far this soon, but here we are. And we have a lot of momentum for the future. So we're open to any questions.
Thank you all. you guys have made incredible progress. It's great to see how many housing units. I wanted to ask a question to begin with about the infrastructure. I think it's extraordinary that you've been able to find $19 million to complete some of that infrastructure. I mean, one of the concerns I've always had is that you have a hard time assembling funding for things other than housing, but it looks like you've done a great job here on a critical need. Do you think you can go back to the state and IIG for more funding in the future for infrastructure around some of these units, or do you think this was probably a well that you get to go to only once?
I think it's possible that there could be future ASIC or IIG awards. You know, those programs are constantly evolving. The latest ASIC round is out, you know, so we'd have to, it really depends on what is the nature of the improvements. Do those improvements reduce greenhouse gas emissions? So it's possible. It's something that, you know, we're constantly scouring the available resources that are out there to finance our projects. The IIG capital that we accessed was of a variety that was really meant for multi-phase kind of catalytic projects. So it was a very perfect fit for this project. That was, I'd say, more of a one-time type source. The other issue we have with IIG right now and other state programs is that HCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, is essentially very limited in terms of the capital it has to deploy. There was talk this past year of a $10 billion housing bond. It didn't make the November ballot. The hope is that it will make I think the midterms ballot in another year or two. So we'll see where that goes, but we definitely need more resources at the state level. At the county level, we have some new resources that are available to us through Measure A. Those will be rolled out in the months and years ahead. That is very encouraging. But yeah, we were thrilled that the state invested that kind of capital on federal property to enable this transformation, and are just very grateful.
Yeah, well done. Nicole Bronca.
Hi, everyone. At every board meeting I've attended, I've asked this exact question, and it's never been incorporated into this presentation. I'm still looking for the unit size breakdown for the developments. It is quite possible that all of these buildings are being built with thoughtfulness around family composition, including veteran families, people who become pregnant and need larger spaces, people who have home attendants who need larger spaces, but it's hard for us to tell if we can't see that information. So I would ask again if we could incorporate that into the next presentation, and then anything you can offer today so that we can get a better sense of what's available.
Thank you
I'd
for that.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I can speak to some of that. Nicole, there's 7 projects currently under construction at West LAVA, so the composition and the unit sizes vary from project to project. I think for the sake of brevity, we probably didn't include it in today's briefing. I didn't know that it was something specific you had asked for previously. That having been said, we can easily put the information together for you. It exists, and just have our partners at OAM share that with you directly. But please know that our team is very thoughtful, building by building, to make sure that we're meeting the needs and the data as shown in the pit count and what we're hearing from veterans, you know, how many of them have families or children, or how many of them are hoping to age in place and may need an attendant in the next couple of years. As you know, this is permanent supportive housing, and we're not building things for a couple of years or 5 or 10 years. It's really in perpetuity. So we hear your concern and your question, and we can get something over to you.
Yeah, it's a very fair point, Nicole, and we have raised it a few times before. I mean, my understanding is the vast majority of the units that are being built are studio, and there's a few there's a good portion of 1 bedrooms, and there's none or virtually no 2 bedrooms. And so I think Nicole's point is this one of is that enough diversity?
Yeah, we will share that information. You're right, Rob, that the early projects did feature an abundance of studios. In the subsequent phases, we've done more and more 1 bedrooms. For instance, building 158 is entirely 1 bedrooms. And then I know we do have some 2-bedroom sprinkled in. Across the region, it has been challenging to fill 2-bedroom veteran units. The nice thing about 1-bedrooms is they can accommodate household compositions between 1 and 3 members. So we want as much flexibility in these buildings as possible to meet the veteran need as it exists. But yeah, we will be sure to share that information. We have a nice matrix that we shared with this committee previously on the AMI issue, and I think what we can do is add the unit mix to that same matrix, so you have all of it in one place.
That would be great. Stephanie Cohen?
Thank you. I have a few questions. The first one is around building 408 and the meeting that happened this week where I think 300, was it building 300 that was funded or not funded, approved, and 408 was not. Does 408, so you guys are going to resubmit, I assume, right? And then how does that hold up, or does it hold up the project or around the parcel release schedule? I think they don't meet every month, I don't think. So I'm just curious how that non-approval contributes to the timetable.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yes, 300 was selected. We were next in line. Like I said, we'll be reapplying come January. So at this point, it's not going to hold us up too much. We're working internally to figure out what our new timeline will be in terms of shovels in the ground. So we'll be working with the VA on the parcel release. But the slide we showed earlier already showed a Q4 construction start. We're not anticipating anything later than that. We're still just trying to figure out internally when it would happen in hopefully 2025.
Okay, so you went early
So
enough.
not anticipating a major, the benefit of the new round being in January is that it's not, hopefully not going to push back our timeline too severely.
Okay,
So
perfect. Thank
we'll
you.
know more in the coming weeks.
My next question is something I ask about all the time is voucher allocation. Where are we in terms of voucher allocation to projects, and then the worry, or maybe it was a past worry and isn't relevant anymore, about the county reaching their cap?
Stephanie, I'll maybe speak to this, and if any of my partners have additional feedback. LACTA has provided the vouchers and the commitments, and I know there is an ongoing concern about reaching that cap. I don't think they're there yet. There's been a lot of advocacy at the federal level to increase the cap. That's something that housing authorities across the country have signed on to. So we're mindful of it. We contribute to those advocacy efforts. We haven't yet hit that threshold, though.
Well, so the projects that are in construction right now and anticipated are already allocated. Is that correct?
Yes, you receive a commitment prior to construction closing, and you sign what's called an agreement to enter into a housing assistance payment contract. So you have that commitment locked in at the point of construction closing.
So the county won't or couldn't necessarily reallocate those vouchers to a different project if a different project, I don't know, like finished construction sooner, or could they?
That would, that is a contract that we sign with the housing authority.
Oh, okay.
They just have to be prepared to deliver those, have those vouchers
Yeah.
available at the point that the building is being leased up.
Okay. And so we really are not clear on whether or not there will be vouchers available for future projects, because we don't know what other projects are going to come through the county pipeline. Is that fair? Keith, do you have more on this? Maybe.
Yeah, I want to wait for my turn,
Oh.
but I could jump in here.
Yeah, I want an answer.
Now that I've interrupted anyway.
No, we know you've had to work on this.
I have, and I guess bottom line up front, I actually don't have newer information than I've shared previously. I just wanted to remind you of what I've said before, which is there is an ongoing disagreement, from what I can tell, between LACDA's calculations regarding its cap and HUD headquarters calculations regarding its cap. and whether they hit the cap or not is therefore not known. It's also a consistently moving target because it's based on a percentage. It's based on a denominator. HUD is likely to issue they could get new vouchers either this year or future year. That would change the calculation. That would push out the cap. The reason I raised my hand is I think one thing you could do as a board here is request a presentation about this particular topic and invite not only LACDA, but invite HUD headquarters. Let's have everybody in the same conversation, because that's the piece that doesn't seem to have happened yet.
Yeah.
I've asked for that and haven't been able to get that myself. So something for you to consider. It unquestionably has potential bearing on the development of the campus, our ability to hit 1,200, all of that. It's a really important topic, and it shouldn't be this kind of an ongoing unknown.
And Brian, Steve,
Quick question.
sorry.
Who would be the program office within HUD to ask for?
It's PIH, Public and Indian Housing. I actually have a POC I could send you, Rob, if you'd like.
Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just curious, Brian, Steve, Parisa, if you guys have had any conversations with the county supervisors about this topic and this issue, so that if and when there is a time for a push for LACDA for the county with HUD, that there's political support. Do they even know that this is potentially an issue? Yeah.
I'm not certain, Stephanie. I mean, we haven't gotten to the place where LACDA has not been able to issue commitments, and we have essentially 3 additional commitments in hand now between 256, 408, and 409 that are all moving forward. But I agree with you that it would be helpful to have, in particular, Supervisor Horvath be aware of this issue.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you to do it, but I would recommend that you prep the supervisors, because I don't know when this will be an issue, but I anticipate that it will be at some point. I just have one more thing to say. It's not a question, but well, maybe this first part of it is a question. Steve, is this your last meeting?
No, I will be around. I am
Okay.
retiring as CEO December 31st, handing it off to Daryl Vincent, who might be on the call. But I'm contracted with US Vets to hang on to this project,
Oh, okay, good.
so that there'll be continuity.
Okay. I saw in a news article that you were retiring, and then I was at the Rams game that you were being honored, and I remembered, oh no, we're losing Steve Peck. So as you transition out of the role, I just personally, I want to thank you for your work in this space. I don't know if you know this, Steve, but you got me interested in veterans affairs and veteran advocacy when I was a very young field deputy, almost 15 years ago, working for the state legislature. You brought me to the location in Inglewood, and we talked about services and the way that you provide services for veterans. And we've done a lot of good work together. And I just want you to know that I personally appreciate you. I appreciate you on this project, and your commitment to this population is something that's inspired a lot of people, but someone like me who's not a veteran, only has, not only, but has grandfathers that were World War II veterans, but I don't come from a long line of veterans. And I just really appreciate you, and I appreciate your work. And I wanted to take time to thank you in front of all of these people, some who know you very well and some who really didn't have the same opportunity that I did to work with you. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Stephanie. Yeah, like I said, I'll be around, and I'll continue to advocate in DC for this site. This is such an important project. I want to make sure that it carries on, and Daryl Vincent will be picking up the ball very effectively, may I say.
We look forward to meeting him.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I think all of us feel the same way, Steve, and we're glad that you stayed on board. While we've had our disagreements from time to time, I know we all are focused on trying to get the best results for veterans.
Indeed.
Beth Sandor.
Thanks, Rob. Beth Sandor. Just congratulations to the team for this incredible progress. There seems like there's a lot happening in 2025 to be excited about. which makes me just want to talk about something we have talked about before, which is how to really use the referral process. Maybe this is a question for some of the one team staff as well, but how is the team that is doing referrals into these buildings and the folks who are going to operate these buildings thinking about the balance of acuity level among the tenant population so that these buildings are manageable, livable for the tenants, and that it isn't, we already have established the total number of units across the campus right now at 1,200 is unprecedented, and not having a balanced mix of acuity level across the individual projects as well as the portfolio of buildings is likely to create a lot of strain on staff, case management staff, and staff generally on the site. And so how are you all thinking about balancing those referrals? I know to line up with what your restrictions are from funders, but ensuring that it isn't, for some of these buildings coming online, for example, 404, that you aren't, 73 units aren't being entirely filled with veterans with high acuity needs, and that there's some balance in the tenant mix. I don't know who's best placed to answer that question.
That would probably be me. A little bit. John Kuhn. So
hey, John.
This is the challenge we face. So we have actually worked with Samson Barris to identify a screening tool that we can use to try to spread the high acuity veterans in placements across different buildings, both on and off campus, for the very reasons you described. The challenge for us is that the pace of interest that we get from veterans is such that if we were to use this faithfully, this instrument, and limit the number of high acuity veterans who are referred to these buildings wouldn't be filled. We essentially need to refer everybody we can to get the buildings filled. Otherwise, oh, and Sally's on, so I can let her. Actually, I'll shut up at this point since Sally's more involved than I am.
No, not at all, John. I echo what you said. And while we're really excited to balance acuity and think that should be a priority, we're finding it's a little bit more challenging than we originally thought it would be, due to the need to refer and ensure that we get the buildings filled. And one of the things we're talking about is there an ability to use VA data, various data points, to be able to identify sort of like a number of acuity? We have a lot of hotspot reports. We've got a lot of data in the VA system that can lead us to understand the acuity without having to have a personal relationship with the individual. And so that is something that we're really excited about doing. And I know there have been some initial conversations with Homeless Program Office in the past about using a variety of data points to include addiction information, severity of complexities and medical issues, things like that. We haven't landed on a solution just yet, but that is front of mind and really important to us. We want to fill up these buildings quickly, but we also want to do that in a way that intentionally matches individuals to buildings so that we can create that kind of balance that you're talking about, Beth.
Can I
Beth, I have
just
a question
clarify?
for you. Can I?
Sure.
I'll hold it.
Go ahead.
I'll hold it. Yep. No.
Can I clarify one thing? The pressure to fill the buildings, I'm assuming that's coming from maybe two things or three things. One, is it related to just lease up timelines related to LIHTC, kind of political pressure, and just like urgency around housing veterans? But what are the key drivers of that urgency, and what support would you need to, I know there are LIHTC deadlines that might not enable this, but what would you need to be able to do this thoughtfully? What support would you need to be able to do this in a thoughtful way? I just feel mindful, and many of us on this board have been in this situation before. You know, once you lease up the building, that's your tenant population. There's obviously attrition and turnover, but that's what you have, and you only get to do it well once. And with so many units coming online next year, how could this board support you all in having the resources and the time and the space you need to do that well so these buildings operate optimally?
And I would just say, ultimately, all of those things mentioned are urgent.
Okay.
But I will say that the pressure to ensure that no veteran is unhoused is probably the highest priority for me in particular. But I know I saw Keith had his hand up, and we had actually talked about data points to do that. I think having the flexibility to be a little bit more intentional about how we fill the buildings would be incredible. There's a lot of work right now, Beth, going into by name list case conferencing and even refining that more, specifically to, keep up with the momentum of what we're trying to do for this surge, and really put some things in place that can be used for the long term. And I will say, what we're currently operating from on that by name list doesn't actually get us to that information that we really need in terms of acuity and things like that. But I'll stop there. And I think Keith might have some things to talk about regarding the data point.
Yeah, and Beth, this is actually a specific for you. So you may recall that many moons ago, we actually worked with you in Community Solutions to build in vulnerability index items into homes. And we actually used that in terms of reports we provided to Community Solutions supporting 100,000 homes campaign. Those items are still there. And one of the things that the HPO team has offered is to essentially build a little acuity report out of those. And my question for you, because I haven't kept up with the literature, I know the SPDAT fell out of favor. I don't know if the vulnerability index did. I don't know if those are the best items, but we have a huge advantage in the sense that they're already in the system. In fact, we've got years of data with it. So I wanted to just ask a quick opinion. And if this is better, we're taking up PD time, so I don't know that that's the best time to have this conversation, but I would love to talk to you about that and get your take.
I'd be happy to, Keith, I'd be happy to follow up offline. Like, how could we give you what information we have on that and support any way we can.
Okay, sounds good.
Rob, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, John.
I just wanted to add also, Sally, I think, touched on it briefly, but we have a matching contract that is starting with Military and Veterans Affairs, so Jim Shop, and we hope that that will help us speed these referrals. The other downside is if we don't get these referrals quickly, this is very much a use it or lose it situation. We have a couple of PVVs where we had to let go of units because we couldn't fill them fast enough. So if the choice is not filling the units or maybe putting too much acuity in it, we're going to put in too much acuity because we don't want to lose units. So that is the economics of this. You know, the light tech rules are pretty inflexible, and they have their deadlines.
Yeah. Thank you all for those clarifications. It's really helpful. And I just want to, I don't know, as you are getting in the thick of this, and there are things the board can do to be supporting you to, you know, given the constraints of LIHTC and others, any support or expertise we all can provide or cover or conversations to help make this as balanced as possible. I think it will serve the entire project to have buildings that are balanced in the acuity level long term. But thank you for your thoughtfulness.
This is Steve. Thank you, Beth, for bringing that up. We talk about that a lot because we have large sites. The therapeutic community really helps with that. Since Housing First, the acuity level of our veterans has gone up. So we've had to add professional staff. We're working here in California with the state to add more mental health assistance. There's the California Veterans, the CVHI health initiative, which will add mental health professionals to our staff. So we're very aware that there's going to be a lot of significantly disabled veterans in this project. The emphasis has been to get homeless veterans off the street. So there's that as well. But ultimately, we would like to be able to put more workforce housing in here so that there was a good mix. So that the veterans who are more able are lifting those who are less so. And the therapeutic community can help us do that. But it's going to be a work in progress, and I think we're going to learn as we go.
I kind of have a follow-up question related to that, which is as to one of the buildings, it's the Frank Gehry design building that I think TSA has. If I recall correctly, the developer committed to something like 50 of those units being for veterans with serious mental illness. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
So I would have to guess that in the next year, that ends up being kind of a real serious resource for deciding for those veterans that have serious mental illness, what's the correct place to place them. You have a lot of capacity in that building is one way of thinking about it. So do you have any sense as to how you're using that? I mean, I guess one of the questions I've always had is with 3 different developers now with that's collective actually being a developer as well. How do the 3 developers think among themselves about referrals? In other words, is the agency is making a referral, but why wouldn't there be a preference for the time being for veterans with serious mental illness to refer it to TSA for that building?
It's just not how the referrals are done. Sorry, Tess Mango. It's not how the referrals are done because of fair housing, right? So I think it's also important to note that even though there are 50 set aside for veterans with severe mental illness, in that strata are veterans with various different levels of severe mental illness, right? So they require different levels of case management. In addition, there likely are already more veterans with severe mental illness in a building like 207 or other buildings, because so many veterans go with undiagnosed and untreated mental illness that, they white knuckle through. So it is an interesting question, but I don't think could be solved by, concentrating those with severe mental illness in one building, since it's so prevalent within the community.
Yeah, as Tess said, Rob, there are 26, I believe, out of the 70 units in building 207 are DMH units for veterans with severe mental illness. And that building is very, very stable. I think that's the most stable population thus far on campus. There have been a couple of challenges. A couple of veterans were simply too mentally ill to maintain their housing there, were disruptive, but that's been the exception rather than the rule. And as long as we continue to add professional staff, work with VA to provide those services, I think it will work well. But I think the long term, a mix of acuities would be desirable.
Yeah, I just want to ask a follow-up question, because I need to make sure I understand how this is going to work, which is, I know that the TSA building with the 50 units for serious mental illness is not yet open. But what I'm asking is the question of, once it's open, why wouldn't there be a preference to refer all veterans, all homeless veterans who have serious mental illness to that building as opposed to other buildings? I don't see how that would violate the fair housing laws. Am I missing something?
Well,
we want there to be a mix. It would not be desirable to put all veterans with serious mental illness in one building. Their day-to-day activities are lifted by those other more capable veterans in a building. So that's and there'll be some veterans in every building with severe mental illness. But we want to spread them out throughout the campus rather than put them all in a single building.
I totally understand the notion of spreading them out so that you don't ever have that great an acuity. I'm asking the question, if you have a building with 120 units, of which 50 are deed restricted to be for folks with serious mental illness, doesn't that get regarded as a resource for the purposes of making the referrals? In other words,
so I think, Rob, you're saying from a referral standpoint, this is Parisa from TSA, you're saying, can we ensure that VA is referring all veterans on the by name list who have indicated mental illness, can we ensure that that entire population is being referred to 701 MacArthur as part of this process? You're not saying make all 118 units set aside for mentally ill individuals.
That's perfectly the way
Okay.
it's saying it.
Okay, I understand now. I think that's actually more of a question for John's team. Obviously, we received the referrals from them, and we are committed to filling the 50. But in terms of the total population and how they're handling referrals, that's really more of a question for John. So
Let me just put it this way. I mean, my concern would be that as 3 people come in, we refer them to 3 different buildings, to 3 different developers, because of some notion that we have to make each of the developers successful. I don't think that's the way we should think about this. I think the issue should be we have certain housing needs and we have certain housing constraints. And 701 has some real practical constraints with the level of acuity we agreed to, or that the developer agreed to. So maybe my question is when you think about referrals, is there a notion that we go around the buildings and we try to distribute them across the buildings so that they're each kind of experiencing the same operating risk about filling them? Or is there a way to kind of referee all the needs of the veterans? That's a lot of questions. So I'll go to John Kuhn.
So there are multiple competing interests here. So I've mentioned a couple of them, the economic ones, the desire to get veterans into permanent housing. We also offer veterans choice. So we don't say to a veteran, here's where you're going to live, take it or leave it. We say, here are some options. And the veteran might apply or request to apply to multiple buildings. So what happens is, because of veterans' choice, we don't exercise total control of where a veteran goes. And a veteran who is disabled, by definition, all this is PSH, so we're dealing with high rates of disability and SMI in any case, may prefer to be on the grounds because of access to healthcare. So we're almost certainly going to see higher rates of SMI and disability on the grounds, first because obviously it's PSH, but also the veterans who have high needs for medical care, this is just easier for them. And they often elect it instead of community options, which we have many. In fact, most of our placements, vast majority of our placements, still go out in the community.
Thanks. Beth?
This might be a question for Brian. I have referred often to the housing matrix you guys provided recently. I think that was back in August, and just want to appreciate that and thank you for adding the unit type as Nicole has requested. In the kind of understanding the unit set asides for the buildings that are coming online in the next year, they all say that they're set aside for homeless, it's like veterans, homeless, and then the ones in development say homeless or at-risk veterans. For the units, the buildings like 402, 156, 157, all coming online sooner, is that also true that those set asides are for veterans who are homeless or at risk, or is it 100% for homeless veterans? I don't know if my question is clear.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Brian DeAndrea Century. So the earlier buildings tended to have more city, county, state capital that have more restrictions, chronically homeless designations, SMI designations. And so that's what we're talking about. To keep in mind that buildings 156 and 57 have 35 units set aside for veterans that present with serious mental illness. So it's not just a 402 condition. So the expectation is that we carry on and we continue using PACT Act capital and some of the Tunnel to Tower capital, Tunnel to Tower Foundation capital, that we will have developments that are less restrictive in terms of those subpopulations. They could serve them, but they're not restricted to those subpopulations. And then we would be bound by the Leasing Act itself, which requires supportive housing. And that definition of supportive housing involves both the homeless or at risk of homelessness definition. So it's less restrictive. And that's, I think, the place that we're looking to get to. So we can enjoy more balance within our buildings. One other blue sky idea that I want to just kind of share that kind of I think is an intersection of everything we're talking about today is that veteran choice is incredibly important. We've had 8 veterans turn down building 404 already. They chose not to live there, and that is their prerogative, and we respect that. Once a veteran moves into a unit with a project-based voucher, they can port that voucher after living there for a year into any other apartment that a landlord will accept their voucher. But keep in mind that a veteran that lives on the outside with a housing choice voucher or without, they can't port into a project-based voucher unit. That PBV unit has to be set aside for a veteran, an existing veteran that is experiencing homelessness that represents kind of a new move-in. We've, amongst the PD team, have talked about that idea of could a veteran on the outside, either an existing PBV unit somewhere else in LA or an HCV holding veteran, should they be permitted to move into existing PBV units? They were previously homeless, right? And they would represent veterans that have more stability, and that could potentially be a mechanism to promote more balance within our buildings. That would require some legislative changes and policy changes.
Thank you, Brian.
John, you're on mute.
I just wanted to amplify a bit of Brian's comments because he's spot on about the need to have a more mixed population. And I think of, sort of being a risk of being a broken record on this. For us to do acuity measures to leaven the population with an exclusively PSH clientele, it's going to make a marginal difference. I mean, really working with a very challenging clientele no matter what. The only way for us to really mix the population is move to an affordable housing concept that offers services, as Brian described. We can offer supportive services, but they do not need to be at the same level of intensity. Supportive services could be assistance getting employment, transition assistance, things that are not nearly as needed or may not even be a part of PSH. So I think we have options open to us if we can pursue them. And this is going to be critically important going forward as we expand this community so we don't recreate a Skid Row. We want to create a community people want to live in that is desirable, that incorporates every one of the elements that you've heard about that veterans, even in our limited survey, enjoy about it. It's a attractive campus. It will have amenities. There's a surrounding area that's desirable. We want people to want to live here and for veterans to experience everything that they should in their home, in their community. But if we go straight PSH and we build out, more than 1,200, whatever we end up landing at, without a more mixed community, I think it's something we're going to regret.
Rob, I know I've spoken a lot, but let me just make this my last comment on here. I just want to say to the board, I just want to echo what you said, John. I think if this board doesn't take seriously how we support helping all the parties involved here ensure these buildings are mixed with mixed income, mixed acuity levels, it will be to the detriment of this project long term. It will be a very difficult community to help support long term. It will not thrive in the ways it could if we can be more intentional now and not wait. And I think it's urgent now because when I look at the lease up schedule and these buildings getting filled, when we're talking about 800 units, as you were pointing out, Rob, if we aren't mindful of how we're filling those units now, and that it's really a community that represents communities in any neighborhood in Los Angeles, we are going to end up with a really difficult environment in which veterans will choose not to live here because it isn't a community that is thriving in the ways that it could. And so I just encourage the board to really be paying attention to this question of how the buildings are getting leased up, who's going into those units, how to make it mixed with veterans who are need workforce housing, how it is mixed with veterans who are low income veterans are at risk of homelessness, and not just right now. My guess is the pressure is fill the next unit with the next highest acuity veteran that is on the street and needs to move into housing tomorrow because of the urgent public health crisis of having veterans on our streets. And that may or may not be the best long-term strategy here. So thank you for everyone's work and appreciate this, the mindfulness.
I appreciate the comments. I think it's a super timely conversation because I think there's going to be a lot of placement work next year, which is a good challenge to have. But on the other hand, if it's not done well, then we'll be haunted by the consequences for years. I did want to ask because I think we saw for the first time the renderings for 408 and 409. So I want to revisit an issue we've kind of discussed and debated as a board. The secretary did not agree with our last group of recommendations. The board members will remember that in June, we recommended that the secretary and the agency keep development north of Nimitz for the time being, and that the status of 408 and 409 be deferred for a host of reasons. The project-based voucher cap, and the whole question about what the level of need was. But the secretary disagreed with us, and the secretary said, no, we're going ahead with turning over the parking lots that are 408 and 409, and we're going to allow construction of those buildings, and we're going to allow the principal developer to do ground floor commercial or retail activities. So what I wanted to talk with you about, Brian, and I guess it's Brian and Parisa, is 408 and 409, those renderings. Are those the renderings that the architects are going to work off of? Because I wanted to ask you kind of some questions about those ground floor choices, those designs.
Yes, I can speak for 408. This is Parisa. Yes, the rendering that we showed you does include some community-facing amenities on the ground floor.
Is there any way we could pull up those renderings? Because I want to get a sense. I think this is the first time we've seen something visual. I just want you to kind of talk us through what you have in mind.
I'm sorry, is somebody pulling up the slide? I don't have control over it.
It sounds like Eugene's helping us.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Ah, okay, sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Give it a moment.
Going back. Stop. Go the other way. Next one. Right there.
It's a front rendering. It's a rendering of the front of the building.
That's right. Thank you so much. So as mentioned, we have 408 and 409 coming up in 2025. 408 is already in plan check. We already have our voucher allocation, so we're excited to move forward with this. As Rob pointed out, there is an opportunity here for ground floor activation in all of the buildings that we're contemplating for the town center. So what we're discussing here is not commercial in the traditional sense. It's more communal facing amenities that can be used by residents of 408, 409, the future town center, but also will be accessible to veterans living across the campus. So most of our buildings for TSA, US Vets, Century, and our partners at CORE, they all have, a small community kitchen or a small fitness center. We're really contemplating more of a programmatic effort in these spaces. So for example, in 408, and I'll defer to Brian to speak more about what they're contemplating for 409. But for 408, we're thinking of a larger fitness center that would be programmed to have more organized classes and just a bigger set of offerings than what you would find in individual building fitness rooms. We're also talking about a sort of communal rec center or rec room. So much of the feedback that we've received, both anecdotally and in a lot of TES's outreach, which has been well documented, veterans want a place to gather. And right now in our buildings, we all have community rooms, but they're not necessarily big enough for what veterans are looking for. So in that space, we're talking about, more of a peer resource room, a place where people can come for employment support, things of that nature, maybe more computer labs, a small library. We're really working excuse me, working with the VA to see exactly what veterans want and what veterans need and proceeding accordingly. So I'll ask Brian to chime in because I know the programming for 409 is a little bit different based on survey feedback. So go ahead.
So before we move on, let me just ask you some questions about 408, if we can go back. So it looks like it's a 4-story structure, is that right?
It's 3 stories of residential, but yes, 4 stories.
Okay. And you said that on the ground floor, you had in mind an expanded rec room and an expanded gym. Are those the 2 main activities for the ground floor?
There's a third amenity that's escaping me at this moment. I apologize. But yes, there's 3 separate spaces, community amenities A, B, and C, all on the left-hand side of the rendering. The right-hand side of the rendering is really reserved for more building-specific amenities for the residents of that building. We recognize that many veterans may not want to be in a more crowded or more public gathering with other people from the community. They may want to just have a more private space that is for residents only. So we want to be respectful and mindful of that, particularly when we're serving veterans across the spectrum of mental health.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question that leaps off the page for me, at least, is the things you're describing, the gym and the rec room, those are services meant for residents of the campus, correct? They're not meant for veterans generally.
They are meant for veterans of the West LA VA campus.
Residents.
But I mean, some of these uses that we've been talking about for the town center, you know, to kind of dovetail on the conversation we were just having, I think would be inviting for veterans from around greater LA to come to campus and take part. So I don't think it's necessarily mutually exclusive.
Look, I don't want to parse words too much here, but there are rec rooms in other buildings, and we traditionally think of those rec rooms as amenities for the residents. So I'm not seeing the agency's response to our board has been to say they're going ahead with the town center, but they're spreading the elements of the town center across the bottom of these buildings. And neither of the things you've described to me strike me as a town center element. They strike me as building amenities. So is there anything on the ground floor of this building that's contemplated for veterans generally?
Yes. Okay. Let me correct myself. So as I said, we have A, B, and C. The gym, for example, is really meant for all veterans who choose to come to campus to take part. The rec room is also something that would be open to the community to take part. The third space that I'd overlooked previously is meant to be a vocational training center, which again, I think could serve veterans from the greater Los Angeles area. So I think when you use the word commercial, it sends a signal that we have uses that are not in line with our actual vision for this space.
Yeah, I mean, commercial to be could mean a gym. So I think this is a really huge issue. I don't find the agency's response as satisfactory, and I've talked to a bunch of board members, and I don't think they do either. So I can just assure you, we are going to be laser focused in the future on what exactly is implemented here. And so I'd hate to see it's just a larger rec room or it's just a slightly larger gym that's meant mainly just for the residents. Because the agency's telling us with its responses that it's going to implement the town center by activating these ground floors.
Respectfully, these uses will activate the ground floors. And if we don't have it in this briefing, but 408, like I said, it's part of what we're contemplating for this entire area, which includes a lot of indoor-outdoor space, a lot of interface with Building 13 that US Vets will be rehabilitating, a lot of communal activation that begins with the ground floor. I mean, I guess I don't follow why that wouldn't be a form of communal activation to have those uses in those spaces.
Well, I think it all depends on implementation. So Sarah Hunter, you've got your hand up.
Thanks. Sarah Hunter here. I just wanted to go back. I had a question about the previous conversation regarding referrals and the choices veterans make in terms of choosing to live on the campus versus living somewhere else. And my question is whether you're capturing those reasons for deciding to live away from the West LA VA campus, because I think that's really important for us to better understand why veterans are deciding that they don't want to live on campus. so that, you know, what's being planned in the future helps to meet those needs. And, you know, obviously some of the early concerns were around security. And, you know, today I felt better about security concerns being put in place. We're still trying to address building community and having better access to amenities. So I imagine that might be a concern that veterans are considering when deciding whether to live on campus or not. And so just a question about, you know, is that information being captured? If so, what are you learning? If not, can you do a better job of capturing that information so that could, you know, feed back into continuous quality improvement and making the campus, you know, sort of the preferred option or desirable place for veterans? Thanks.
I think it's one of the several areas for collecting feedback. So certainly the feedback from veterans who have chosen not to live on the campus is very important. The reasons why, sometimes it's very personal to them. Project-based housing, apartment-style housing isn't their jam. They want a solo, you know, house. They want to come check it out and see what was on the campus. It's not for everyone. So there's that piece of it. There also is further discussion, as you heard Andrew and VA talk about, collecting additional data and really being mindful of how that data is collected and collated, who it is that is that information is coming from. Most recently, we utilized the Bunker Social effort because, you know, the peers from the community come to that effort pretty regularly to ask questions about what veterans wanted to see in a peer community center. As you heard VA say, also Jim Zenner, Sally Hammett, and I are co-chairs stewarding and bringing that effort to fruition. But it is really important to consider, you know, the sources of information, what they're linked to, and how those things are tied back to the feedback that we're getting. So yeah, there's a continuous feedback loop that we've implemented. We do have our online survey. The collective does open, so we're always seeking those pieces of feedback. Even today, there's lots of community connection going on as the collective is being built. I'm getting messages about things we're talking about right now from veterans in the community who are like, hey, we wish there was more than one period of, you know, open comment. And I said, well, you have to ask veterans to show up to comment for the original open comment, you know, session, and letting them know things like, you know, you can submit to the Federal Register after the meeting's closed. A lot of veterans don't know that. So there's a lot of feedback to be collected, and I really appreciate, you know, your thoughts about how important it is to integrate those things into not just, you know, feedback about referrals and where veterans want to live, but these amenities and services that are so crucial.
Thanks, Tess. Brian, could you tackle building 409 and go over that rendering with us and talk about the ground floor activities for that building, please?
Sure. So building 409, like 408, is one of the 5 buildings in the town center area. It's one of the 4 new construction buildings, and we'll be contributing more than 4,000 square feet of space to the external community. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier, the focus of this building is really around healing through the arts, and so two of the uses in particular that this building will be contributing include a maker space where there will be programming around, you know, painting, sculpture, other forms of you know, manipulative arts, and then also a performance art oriented space, including a black box theater that can be used for performances, for art shows, for things of this nature. So this is really intended not only for the residents of this building and the broader West LA community, but it could be open and available to veterans throughout the region. So we're excited about each of those uses. And then the building itself has its fair share of building specific amenities, some of which Parisa described a little earlier. So that is how this building will be contributing to the town center and how it will ensure activation of these ground floor spaces.
Those sound like some good uses. Any further questions for the developer from the board? All right. Thank you all. We covered a lot of ground this afternoon. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.